Have you ever experienced a moment of eerie silence when the laughter and lively conversations around you suddenly become like a blurred background noise and you realize you are standing in the middle, completely separate? That feeling of loneliness is not the absence of people, but an absence of understanding, an underground river flowing between you and those around you, even though they are just an arm's length away. The paradox is that we often feel the deepest loneliness not in empty rooms, but precisely in the bustling places where we are forced to play the role of fitting in. So, what is really happening in our minds and hearts when we feel lost amid the very connections we have? There is a profound psychological truth that the feeling of loneliness in a crowd is often not a sign of weakness or a flaw in character, but rather, it is a warning beacon from the inner self, signaling a disconnect between the social persona you are performing and the authentic self you perceive yourself to be. To understand this, we must look through the lens of three key psychological aspects: the attachment style formed from early experiences, the structure of personal identity, and the operation of social cognition. First, consider the attachment patterns formed in childhood, like an unconscious roadmap for your later relationships. Those with an anxious attachment style, for example, often grew up in an environment where attention and affection came erratically, unpredictably. In adulthood, they carry a sensitive antenna, always scanning for signals from others, but also constantly harbor a vague fear that they do not truly belong. At a party, they may laugh and talk naturally, but their minds are preoccupied with questions. Did I say something silly? Do people really want me here? They connect, but they connect from a position of anxiety and self-doubt. The conversation happens, but the deepest part of them, the child still waiting for a sure response, remains utterly silent and alone. Conversely, those with an avoidant attachment style often erect solid walls. They are in the crowd like a remote observer, physically present but emotionally withdrawn. Their loneliness comes from an unspoken pact with themselves. I will not reveal myself, and thus I will be safe. But the price of that safety is a void that cannot be filled. In both cases, the crowd becomes a stage where they perform a play in which the real characters never appear. And it is precisely this absence of the authentic self that creates a profound loneliness. Second, we must examine the structure of identity and the concept of the true self and false self, introduced by psychologist Donald Winnicott. The false self is a mask developed to meet the expectations of the outside world, of family, friends, society. It is useful, it helps us function. But the problem occurs when this mask becomes so thick and rigid that we no longer remember what it feels like to take it off. When you step into a gathering with the false self, a cheerful, sociable, always agreeable version, you have essentially left your real person at home. Every interaction, however positive it may seem, becomes a dialogue between others and a projection. You receive feedback for the mask, not for you. And there is no feeling lonelier than being liked, but for something you are not. The loneliness in a crowd, in this case, is the cry of the abandoned true self, yearning to be seen, to be acknowledged, even for a moment of sincerity. Finally, the social cognitive perspective reveals a phenomenon called the illusion of transparency. We tend to project our internal state outward and, simultaneously, overestimate others' ability to see through it. When you feel hurt, anxious, or unsure, you may believe those emotions are clearly visible on your face and gestures, that people are seeing an outsider. In reality, most people are busy with their own concerns and self-consciousness. The disconnect you perceive is not necessarily a deliberate rejection from the crowd, but often a mental spiral of your own making. You become an isolated island in your own perception, while objectively you are still part of the social continent. This loneliness is further exacerbated by the age of virtual connection, where interactions often remain superficial, and we are surrounded by images of perfect connection that others display, making our own lonely experience seem like a personal failure. So, the next time you stand in a noisy room and feel a cold silence creeping into you, pause for a moment. That feeling is not the enemy, it is a messenger. It is trying to tell you something about the cracks between your versions, about unmet emotional needs, or about thought patterns that are keeping you separate from the world. Loneliness in a crowd is, at its core, a crisis of authenticity. It does not demand that you become more sociable, but that you become more authentic, even if only with yourself in the first step. Ask yourself, which part of me is present here, and which part has been left behind? Because real connection does not begin with being seen by everyone in the room, but by allowing your whole, imperfect self to be present. When you begin to bridge the gap between the social persona and the inner person, that is when, whether in a crowd or in solitude, you may begin to feel you truly belong.